Hello. Welcome. This chair's creaky as fuck. We make do with what we have, though, right? Man. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. And to be clear, it's not as if fascism has just arrived. America, the United States of America, that is, has been a fascist entity since its inception because of the fact that it was built off of genocide, stolen land, colonial extraction, racialized structures and violence, the incredible dehumanization of marginalized people, or even created the concept of marginalization within these structures, because that's what it is. Marginalization is having it be structural, systemic violence that is inflicted on people. Just throwing that out there. Happy Monday. Welcome. A very lighthearted start to the stream. It's another day. I already said that. Ugh. It's Monday. Welcome to whatever this is. This is what we do here, I guess. An attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. Sometimes making more sense than others. Definitely depends on the day, how much sleep I've gotten, what's going on in life. But welcome. Glad to have you here. I didn't give an announcement on my socials that I was going live because my phone died, because this is a pattern of behavior for me, because I can't be bothered to be plugging in my phone, because I honestly don't care enough when it dies. That's how it goes for me. I know this can be very frustrating for people at times, but also to them, I would like to give a reminder that, these little devices are fairly new inventions, that we have had other forms of communication besides this, and it is in our interest to explore these types of communication, especially with all of the techno-oligarchs and their techno-feudalism and how they own all of these platforms, media outlets, AI, shares in the industrial war complex, weapons manufacturers, pharmaceuticals, so-called fashion, so-called beauty. These are industries, not just the art of it all. So, throwing that out there. Yesterday, I went to Pride Without Police, and it was a joy to be there without the pigs there. But they showed up at the end, because it seems like the sad little piggies were upset that they weren't invited, and their fragile little tiny dick egos were extremely hurt by this. And I know you want to be around us because we have great taste, are very hot, are kind and accepting. I mean, not everyone, but especially in an environment like that, was far more inclusive, that like you're desperate to be in on it. But it's tacky to show up to places that you weren't invited, sweetheart. Okay? I want to talk more about this. It was great that there was even an event that had an option that did not have cops, that did not have the pigs there, because the main Pride event that happens in Utah, that's put on by the Utah Pride Center, that is like their main focus. They used to have more of a focus on like programs, like community programs, so that people had more spaces to go to, like mental health resources, activity nights, like a space where people could actually go to and build community. But, you know, nonprofits are part of the shadow state in upholding these systems of oppression a lot of the time, and they're still rampant with corruption a lot. And also this appealing to the system and capitalists, especially, in order to get donations and to justify their existence rather than focusing more on mutual aid efforts and getting like monthly donations from the working class. They just want big donations from these capitalists a lot of the time. I know this, having worked for a nonprofit before, doing some development work, which means like fundraising essentially, and marketing and grant writing. And I was one to always want to like build out efforts for small monthly donations that were coming from people who could afford to do that. So guess what? That's the working class. And that it was constantly discouraged. Like, not to be like tooting my own horn or anything, but like we were able to grow that with a lot of the efforts that I embarked upon and pursued and implemented with these monthly donations. But to the powers that existed there, it was not enough. They wanted the fame and glory and notoriety that came with having these very big moneyed donations, and this is part of the problem. The Utah Pride Center is not excluded from this concept, which is why they've had to close a number of times and reopen, because they've essentially like run out of money because they spend it all on pride and to entertain particularly the white capitalist gaze. A lot of the time it's men, instead of actually focusing on building out programming that could help, I don't know, like save queer lives, provide more acceptance. I know they have since had a change in their executives and some of their board, but I did not go to like the official Pride this year for that reason, and also because of the presence of pigs there. I am not interested in being in that environment. I know it can be exciting and fun and helpful, and there are still opportunities to buy from local vendors and artists and businesses. So, like, there's still that aspect that I think is important. But that was just like my own personal choice. That's not me trying to like virtue signal. I just like do not want to be around cops whenever possible. Which, you know, illustrates more of like a background of having various kinds of interactions with them. But of course, with this Pride Without Police, they showed up at the very end, like as soon as the event ended, circling the parking lot in like 4 squad cars, and them getting out, and they're trying to intimidate people. It was really sad to see the various kinds of reactions in my mind. I think there are many queer people who just don't understand why cops are so aggressive, or like, oh, do they think this is a mistake? People who have not been exposed to this kind of behavior as much. Like, did they not know that they aren't supposed to be here? Like, why are they here? Don't they know that it's, like, specifically without them, it's a show of force, it's to intimidate people, it's to scare people, okay? This is what I was trying to emphasize when I was there. And, like, I do wish there had been more of, like, this effort within organizing to actually show a united front and be like, why are you here? You can't be here. You need to leave. I understand that it can be very scary having confrontations with cops, but also we can't let them scare us, because that is where they get a lot of their power. Yes, they have this institutional power. They have weapons and resources at their disposal and training and surveillance. So, like, we're extremely disempowered in many ways. But it is interesting to see as well how there are people who are like, yes, I want to go to a pride without cops, but not really understand the importance as to why that's even an option. And them showing up at the end is an exact demonstration, quite literally, it felt like a demonstration of fear and power, of trying to emphasize this power imbalance and intimidate people and scare people. And it just made me extra angry because since there were people, like, especially from marginalized communities and people experiencing multiple intersections of marginalization wanting to be at this event because they feel safer. Hello, this is part of, like, the main reason why this event even is important to begin with, that they were feeling very afraid. And it's like, yes, this is what they do. But especially when it comes to, like, the event being more accessible and inclusive of, like, more people with disabilities, of, like, with mobility disabilities and cognitive disabilities. Like, the event was tailored to make it so that people actually had options and that people felt included. And that was a really beautiful thing to see, but also how scared people were. And it just fucking pisses me off. Like, seeing these people come in feeling like they are better than everyone else, and them walking with their stupid thumbs and their stupid vests. I can do that too. Trying to, like, showing off, like, their guns and their holsters, like batons and radios. And to you, I'd like to address you, actually. And I don't care what the consequences are of this. I've just so fucking had it. Who are you when you don't have that badge? Who are you when the system views you as dispensable as the rest of us? They only protect you because you represent what they are, but they don't care about you as a human being. Who are you when you don't have your gun, when you don't have your radio, when you don't have backup teams, when you don't have this system that you seem to love so much that actually is hurting you as well? Why do you think that there's all of this union busting happening with police unions in Utah with this legislation that was passed to make it so that public workers could not be unionizing and have collective bargaining power? Why is it that you think that they didn't include you? It was by mistake? No. Do you feel proud of yourself when you're walking around with your thumb in your vest, with your hands on your hips, when you feel like you have this sense of superiority over other people? Because when you strip all of this away, who are you? Do you actually care about people besides yourself and the people who you view as similar to yourself? Who are you when you go home at night and when you go to sleep? Are you proud of the kind of violence that you inflict on other people? Are you proud of the human beings that you hurt that are more similar to you than these anti-human structures that you protect? Who are you without all of these things? Because it seems like your sense of self only comes from these types of power imbalances that will hurt you as well. You are not any different than the rest of us. And that is why you feel the need to be so violent and domineering, because you want to feel like you have worth or a sense of superiority. That is not because you are superior. It's because all of these systems want you to be a violent person and act in ways that hurt other people. Stay the fuck away from my people. I know this isn't going to persuade anyone, but I think we need to be saying this more often. If you are marginalized, if you are tired of what this system is doing to everyone, You are my people. And don't let these fuckers, don't let these pigs who think they're better than us, who are these insecure little babies. I shouldn't even call them babies because that's insulting to babies. Even calling them pigs, I feel like that's insulting to pigs. These just disgusting human beings because they're people and they're choosing to be this way. Don't let them scare you. It is scary to be around them. But when you look them in the eyes and you have to make them forced to look at your humanity, that scares them. Walk with your head held high. Do not be shrinking when they come by. Do not be slowly backing away. I know some people need to protect themselves, especially when it comes to all of the violence that historically these people have been inflicting, but they are more afraid of a united front. That they were still walking through the middle of this pride event when there was nothing happening that was untoward. Like, this is just what they do because they don't like our existence. And so what do you think they would do if we actually presented a united front? Because they do need to be afraid of us. And to the people who want to even go to Pride Without Police, but also don't think there are certain techniques and ways of resistance that are acceptable with all of these bullshit respectability tactics and respectability politics, that those types of politics, respectability in general, they're colonizer propaganda, trying to say you must conform to this system so that people must be mowed down without any sort of resistance. We must be a united front. And I recognize that this is a very difficult thing to do. But it just enrages me to no end. Take that how you will. Because it's unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to us. And the people who are first to scatter in these moments, I know there's some people, especially those who already feel like they are more at risk of receiving violence. The people who have the most privilege in these situations, particularly white people, able-bodied people, people who have proximity to maleness, cisness, being hetero, that like this is where you show your sense of privilege, of bodies being put on the line, taking on risk, because that's what it means to be a leader. That's what it means to actually care about other human beings. Being a leader is not about having fame or this self-aggrandizement. It is actually taking on risk. You actually have to be willing to be in harm's way for people you care about. Okay. I got so heated with that. I think people need to hear this. I don't give a fuck. So I took some videos. I intentionally cropped people out that I did not want to be shown. So here is one that I took. There they are. Walking through the middle of Pride. They walked straight through all of the booths, and just like the amount of fear that they were inspiring just makes me so fucking mad. Especially with so many people that were in harm's way. And when I was taking this video and looking at them, they both got embarrassed. They were looking in the direction where I was at. And when they realized that I was not backing down, still looking at them, they got embarrassed and started looking away. This is not always something that they do. Sometimes that can make them more aggressive. And honestly, especially being a light-skinned person, this is the kind of privilege that must be accessed at times like this, people. in making it so that they aren't immediately coming to brutalize you. Not like I've not been on the receiving end of this kind of shit before, but also understanding that they're bullies and they're weak because they don't have any sort of morality that they are going off of. It is to scare people. It is to intimidate people. It is to make people feel small. And one of the things that we actually have in our tool belt is to keep track of them, to actually record them and hold them accountable that way, but also to stare them down in the fucking eyes, because that is something that they are afraid of actually being seen for being the small little babies that they are. Again, I shouldn't even call them babies. The small people, selfish, cruel people that they are. Look at this. Because they have nothing better to do but try and intimidate people. This was near the building that I used to work, so that was like very activating to my nervous system to begin with. But we have something that is far greater to fight for, which is our own humanity and care for each other. Which I recognize, like, there are people who may think that that's like a trite thing to say, or just a thing to say to like get like views or follows or whatever. Not like I even have that many to begin with. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck of like, why are we accepting living in this world that there are some people that are viewed as being less than others? This should be unacceptable to all of us. And then when it comes down to it, when there actually is a time for taking on some risk, people fold. I understand there are nuances to why this can happen at times, but especially with the people who have the most privilege, they're some of the first to scatter. Don't do this. Don't do this. If you actually claim to be for collective solidarity and liberation, put something on the fucking line. Take on some risk, because that is what is required of us. It can't just be like, oh, we're accepting that certain people are being brutalized and receiving violence as long as I'm safe, that I'm okay with this behavior. No. This should be unacceptable to us. Just the audacity is staggering. And this is them, like, especially to the people who are confused why, like, cops who have not been receiving their brutality before, like, why would they be here? Why do they want to do this? We don't understand. I feel bad about it. But also, like, explaining to people in real time, this is to scare people. Don't let them scare you. That, like, people are very conflict averse a lot of the time. And especially when it comes to so-called leaders who want to have the notoriety of being part of movements. What do you think it means to be a leader? Do you think it means to just have screen time? Do you think it means to just say your four things, but not actually engage with the human beings who are even allowing you to be in a position that you are? Like, I don't know. It can be really disheartening at times just thinking about how we're so disorganized with all of the like infighting and disagreement on diversity of tactics, that like I'm not going to demonize liberals for going out in their frog costumes. I can make fun of it at times, but also like Optics can be important, but also if you are demonizing the people who are engaging in things that are more direct, like direct action, things that are moving the needle, like labor organizing and anarchist thought, and also people arming themselves against brutality, you have to show that same courtesy. Because this respectability politics bullshit is not helping you, it's not helping us, and it's not helping the cause. I'm saying all of this like people are going to listen. I know I'm not persuading anybody. But I just like have to say it somewhere. It really gets to me. And I know especially people who have been doing this for years and years, especially when it comes to labor organizing, especially our elders that, especially our queer elders with intersections of marginalization, that like they understand these concepts. And I'm not like saying anything that people haven't heard before. I'm not naive or thinking that like what I'm doing is new. I just happen to have like a mic and a camera where I'm able to actually talk about it. So like we need to be continuing this fight. Like we can't let the people who have gone before us to have suffered and struggled in vain, that what they fought for lives on through us, and that we have a duty to continue this. And also if we have ancestors that have caused harm, that we have a duty to correct it, and not in a savior complex type of way. I don't know how to close this with my left hand. There we go. Minimizing the emphasis of my own arguments. Not in a savior complex type of way. That it must be done like actually elevating people so that all voices can be heard. And that sometimes it behooves us to shut the fuck up and listen to people who have more experience with things that we may not know about. So, in the spirit of that, today I did want to go over some headlines. They're an extremely stressful activity. As I get along with streaming, the less I actually am wanting to show the news. I get so angry. Hello, Casual Revolt and Raiders. Welcome. Hello, Zach. Welcome, welcome. Is this a different account of yours, or is this someone else? Hello. Jump scare. Ahoy, hoy. Ahoy, hoy. Welcome. I was just ranting about cops. Ranting about the pigs. Oh, it's a friend. Oh, cool. Hello. I am not familiar with your stream, but I will go follow you. Welcome. Very glad to have you all. Yeah, I just got done ranting about the pigs. Yesterday I went to a pride event of Pride Without Police, and they showed up at the end to intimidate people. So we're going to be learning about the history of policing in the US specifically, to actually talk about the reason why it's even necessary. Thank you. Thank you for helping to reach the follower goal. Thank you, chatters, raiders. ACAB, exactly. Actually, maybe before we get into it, not to scare everyone as I'm taking off a vest. I got some cool pins at Pride. There's this one. There's an ACAB one that I got. This is a recent one that's like a cat with a knife that I thought was very cute. Pigs being pigs, exactly. That's new. Never heard about cops doing anything negative. What? No. The police state? This doesn't exist. I got a pin that says queer as in free Palestine. I got an ACAB pin. There's Fuck Ice. I thought that was cute. Oh, also protect trans folks. I got most of these at Caterpillar Pigeon Art. So if you are interested in getting some similar pins, these are some local queer artists in Salt Lake City. If you're interested in supporting. You have that? It's Cody. Oh. It's so cute. Thank you very much. It's very chaotic on the back. I'm wanting to make it like my pin section. I did add the buttons, but as you can see, there's like so many of them falling off. But that is also kind of a fun exercise of like leaving cute little buttons where I go. The cops don't have our interests in mind? Egad, who would have thought? Yeah, exactly. Chaos is cool. That's what I think as well. It's like the world already is in chaos. We might as well like embrace some of the beauty of it. That's more of like the anarchist leanings coming out. Hello, Stuart Little is my son. Welcome. Casual Revolt, if you're still here, I'm curious to learn about the content that you stream. What were you all previously talking about before this? If you are comfortable sharing. Okay. Actually, I don't even know if I want to go over headlines. I think it's good to be talking about world events, but also I know there's so many streamers talking about that. Maybe let's start with the history of policing in America, since we're just talking about this. We're flexible, moving some of the content around. This is already what we're talking about. Okay. Shall we? Shall we get into it? So this is by Dr. Joy DeGray, and they are having a discussion on, as it says, the history of policing. So I wanted to get this in here because, like, the sad people who still do not understand, even like attendees at Pride Without Police, that like there's a reason, like, why that's important. We need to do more education, even if after the fact, them being scared of police and not learning that like them showing up at the end to intimidate and scare people, that's a reason why. We're going to talk even more about the history. I think that's important. Vietnam War, UK political nightmare. Yeah, oh Jesus. I feel like it's the end of the world. I I feel like it's the end of the world a lot of the time. And so it's like, how do we actually focus on like what is our power, and how all of these various organizing efforts, it's hard to actually land on any sort of agreement with things. Like, how do we move the needle when we're so disempowered, and also like so much internalized bigotry we have to break down and decolonize? That's just like, ugh, it's a lot. We've been learning about the deprivations of American empire in the Vietnam War, the fall of Starmer, and other general gesturing. Political gesturing, you say? Ugh. In the public square? Okay. Shall we get into this history? I do think, I mean, I haven't seen this, so this will be a first viewing for me as well. I am a humble gay jester. Same. I see you. Welcome to the tomfoolery, the queer tomfoolery that happens here. We need more of this queer tomfoolery, queer chaos, agents of chaos. They want to control us, the ruling class, the capitalists, the powers that be, and us actually embracing ourselves, seeing the beauty in ourselves, and taking power back in the little amounts of power that we do have, taking things into our own hands. That's what they're scared of. Okay, I'll stop this diatribe. Fuck the ruling class. Horrible, scummy people they are. Yeah, exactly. Thinking they're better than everyone else, that they have to engage in all of this evil to justify their own sense of worth and their position, rather than being like, oh, we're all humans. But apparently that's like too much to ask. Seems like that should be a basic, oh, we're all people. Okay. Can we go off of that baseline? Apparently not.
4 times is a charm.
Okay, let me get
I'm
this
really excited
audio.
this Wellness Wednesday because a lot's been going on. Um, Working with a lot of folks around the
When did this come
country,
out?
in addition to a lot of guilty people that want to
6 years
call and
ago.
seek absolution from me, and I'm not available for that. But there's also a fair.
In order for us to heal and remedy the problem, we must first understand the root cause and probably diagnose the illness. Yep. The more we can be educated on the history of it all, what tactics have moved the needle, what doesn't, I think that's one of the best ways to actually arm ourselves, and arm ourselves in different ways. Just
Number of
put it that
folks
way.
that are really taking a real deep dive into looking at policing. And I kept thinking the whole time, people, we need to bring somebody on that knows. And I have my very dear friend, brother, really more like a brother to me,
Oh my
Dr.
god, I just
DeLacy
spilled
Davis,
water all over
who
myself.
I'm going to give him the opportunity to
I'm gonna
introduce
keep this
himself
playing, but
and
I'm
his
gonna go wipe
years
this
of
off.
service in policing,
I'll be
his
right
current
back.
work. And I know he is got to be right now. His phone is ringing off the hook because he told everybody this years ago, years and years ago. But I wanted to get to it, and I'm going to do a very short kind of PowerPoint to really kind of give people backgrounds into the history of policing. And then move forward into what we're looking at, because the questions that I know Dr. DeLacy and I spoke about early is just the whole idea of
I'm
unions.
back.
Who's in these unions? Why are they so powerful? And they're extraordinarily
This
powerful.
only happens to me with water
The police union in
specifically, no other
particular.
drink,
So when
so
we
it could
start
be
looking at
worse.
change and we start looking at institutional stuff, we have to begin to look at what keeps these things in place, what is maintaining them. And I don't think we've ever looked. I'd love to see a picture of who.
I usually speed things up just so we can get to more reading today. If you are interested in sticking around after this video, we are going to read from my version of the Communist Manifesto, the address of the Central Committee to the Communist League, if you're interested. So,
Is part of that union. Because again, we cannot separate that from our history. Most people don't understand what's going on in this country because they don't understand our history. So I'm gonna start with a PowerPoint. I'm not gonna do all of it. I'm gonna be jumping around.
You gotta let him. You're gonna let him say a few words before you.
I am gonna let him introduce himself, but when he introduces himself, we're going on a whole nother. You don't understand.
But he can still introduce
okay.
himself.
All right. I'm just telling you.
I'm going to keep it short. Listen, right here. I'm going to keep it short, right?
You can't keep it short.
Just before you lapse into your PowerPoint, and then he can come back to him. But we can't just have this man up here. If we don't.
Okay.
So, I'm a retired sergeant, 20 years from East Orange Police Department in New Jersey. I'm the founder of Black Cops Against Police Brutality, which we founded in 1991 to address these issues in the community. Our mission was to be the conscience of the criminal justice system, to enhance the quality of life of African people, and to improve community police relationships. I think as a result of doing police work and community policing, I was fortunate enough to adopt 4 children that I met while doing police work between the ages of 11 and 16. The youngest is now 33.
okay. I didn't realize they had a cop on here. Don't know about that. Please hold. I think I'm going to find a different source. Talking about being the conscience in the police force, conscience of the police force, that's just an oxymoron, like emphasis on the moron aspect of it. There is not any sort of conscience that goes into policing. Yes, if you have any recommendations, Zachap. Now that I asked you about how you pronounce your name, I am much more confident in it.
Hello, everyone.
Cops are all bastards. Yes, everyone. Okay. Yep. This is more of my speed. Out of the 85. Yeah. They all are bad. All cops are bastards, indeed. Yeah, and it's not an answer to have cops who are from marginalized communities or experiencing intersections of marginalization because they're part of the problem and often are tokenized, as in many other aspects of these oppressive systems, in order to justify the existence of this violent, anti-human state to begin with. One might be the right amount of time frame. Okay, cool. I'm part of everyone. Did said chat braid here those perm tats on your lovely face? Oh, well, thank you. No. I just drew this on. Half a mustache and half of a like goatee, I guess. This is like kind of what I wore to Pride, but not really. Just embracing, like showing the very visible duality of genderlessness, even. But hello, welcome. And indeed, Zachap did raid in here. Are you from New York? No, but I'm very flattered that you would even ask that. I feel like I'm a New Yorker at heart. I've just always felt that way for some reason, but I would love to live there.
You may have guessed from the title of this video, this will be a discussion of the function of police in today's society. We'll be tracing the history.
If you don't mind me asking, where are you located? And you don't have to say if you're not comfortable. That goes for anybody who is in the chat right now. Okay, I'm gonna speed this up. We'll see if this is too much.
Of this organization from its historical roots to what
Whoa,
they are today.
that is that's too fast.
We'll be talking about what their goal is in relation to the states they serve, their funding, their effectiveness in stopping, solving, and preventing crimes, and why people hate them. Although this video was meant to be much shorter, it quickly spiraled into a much bigger story. So yes, this video is about the police and all those things I just mentioned, but it is also a story about the development of political rights. It is a story about austerity, and it is a story about your future. To tell this story, we'll have to visit Ireland, South Korea, Spain, Germany, and of course, the United States, among many other countries. I'll be the first to admit that this video is very US-centric because the situation regarding the police is the most apparent in that country, but the core of the analysis will cut deeply into the police in other Western countries,
I also think
as you will soon see.
Americans liking British accents, it's a form of like daddy issues or mommy issues, parent issues. I should go straight to the genderless one, being a non-binary person.
Laws were enforced, or different
I
forms
should
of
know better.
quote-unquote policing before modern society.
It's parent
Whenever
issues.
the topic of defunding the police or abolishing the police comes up, the immediate reactionary response is, oh yeah, well, what are you going to do when you need help?
But
or
yeah,
who's going to stop bad people from breaking the law? And
it honestly just like reveals how shitty it is everywhere, you know? It's like, yeah, we all are living under global capitalism. We're all living under this techno-feudalism that exists right now. I guess maybe I should have like looked at the description to begin with because I'm a nerd and I'm like, okay, do we have background? Am I doing things in the correct order? My accent's pretty nice. Were you born with X chromosomes, or is that an off-limit question for the non-binary humans? I mean, it can be. I think in general, talking about like all of the various like aspects as to what makes somebody non-binary can seem a bit reductive at times. Um, but since this is an educational space and you weren't asking it in like a rude way, yes, I was. So I was assigned female at birth, but also like talking about how gender is a social construct. It's like, are we talking about chromosomes? Are we talking about physiology? A lot of the time, people want to just focus on genitalia, which is also reductive. But also like other like secondary like sex characteristics. Like I have tits. I did not consent to them growing, to throw that out there. But also like understanding like hormones, and for me it especially is rooted in this concept of me being Indian, or like more accurately talking about ethnicity as Desi, which is like part of Southeast Asian culture, of being Hidra as my gender identity, which is like rooted in this pre colonial idea of understanding duality of gender and like using that as a way to share wisdom with other people. So that's kind of like the mentality of like what I try to bring to life, or even what I'm doing, hopefully, question mark, with this stream. So I was assigned male at birth and did a lot of dance while maintaining my original genitalia. Yeah, it's like we have all of these like gendered activities. That's like, why? What does that mean? If people can dance in general, especially if they are enjoying dancing, like seeing people like have joy, that is an extremely attractive thing. I think we also need to be breaking down what it means to actually, like, what attractiveness even means. In my mind, hotness is a state of mind. And it's like, if you have shitty opinions, then you're like shitty. So, like, that's not an attractive thing. What thoughts do you have? That also is kind of revealing me being more on like the ace spectrum of sexuality, but also pan, because I'm not like limiting myself to like whoever I find like interesting or attractive. I feel the same about my facial and body hair. I did not give them permission to grow. Yeah, exactly. It's like we all have instances of experiencing some of that, and especially when it comes to understanding like the trans and gender expansive experience, that it's like there are all of these things that we can't control about how the world perceives us, or like what happens to our bodies, like going through puberty, and how that is just like heightened for people who experience gender dysphoria. Like I have some facial hair and I love that. I think it's hot, you know? And that's like something that like many people who are assigned female at birth experience anyway. People like waxing their faces, waxing their other parts of their bodies, which in my mind is also a form of oppression and infantilizing women to justify predatory behavior to minors. It's like, I don't want to look like a little kid. So, like, that's not what you're going to find. You know what I mean? It's like everyone has their own taste, but often, like, we are conditioned to view some people as attractive or not. And a lot of the time, it's based off of these, like, white supremacist colonial constructs. I'm part feather Indian biologically. You're indigenous? Oh, but not a tribe member. So I don't tell anyone. Okay, interesting. That also seems like it can be complicated if uh like you have to be like enough like type of blood to be considered like part of a tribe, but also that just reveals how it's like operating within this like colonized system. also grew up as the only white guy in a black neighborhood. I like to be the devil's advocate from birth. Yeah, and also understanding that, like, where you're able to, like, in feeling like on the outside in many ways, but how, like, in certain spaces, like being a light-skinned person, like as I was talking about, like with cops earlier, of like, excuse me, being like able to take on more risk when it comes to standing up to them and like literally putting our bodies on the line, and not in like a white savior complex type of way, but a way that's like, we have to recognize these systems of oppression. I personally feel like sports shouldn't be gendered. That's what I say. I honestly think if we like separate, we didn't have all these separate gendered issues, we would see like women's sports, whatever it means to be a woman, that we would see like how they're like, oh, biologically, they aren't performing as well as men. I think that would radically dissipate because of the like psychological structures that are, and just like all these oppressive structures that are put around people that they can't like reach their full potential. Are there specifically men and women's football? Why can't it just be football? That's how I feel. Like, yeah, exactly. Because then we have to recognize that's like, oh, gender is a very slippery thing, which is why I think it's fun to like gender fuckery is very fun for me, which I'm like, I have half a mustache, half not. This is great. This is symbolic of many things. And also it's just fun because people don't know what to do with that. It like makes their brain break a lot of the time. And it's like, yeah, we need to deconstruct this shit. My grandpa's mom was, okay, I still have white privilege. Women can play in the NFL. I think there are some female at birth boxers who could absolutely wipe the floor with some men. Yeah, exactly. And also like thinking about like I don't claim to be like a super strong person, but I know that I could like take down some dudes who think of themselves as dudes, who are assigned male at birth and identify as dudes. That it's like, it's all relative, but this is why it reveals these larger power structures and how they have to, that are colonial in nature, in order to justify this very gendered patriarchy that we are existing in, because otherwise a lot of their power slips. Which is why we see like the targeting of trans women specifically, of like the idea that people who could be like, whatever this even means, assigned male at birth, which that can be a very arbitrary process to begin with. But like why people would be willing to even give up what is viewed as maleness to pursue like more feminine energy and experience, that like that directly threatens patriarchy and its power of non-consensual dominance. Which is also why we talk about like what it means here specifically, like we talk about power structures and like what it means to actually have like consensual or non-consensual dominance and power exchange. So we talk about that in terms of like kink, and how once you understand these concepts, it's a lot easier to understand these larger concepts in society. I'm a cishet guy, and the most gender inclusive spaces are so fun and thought provoking. Oh, yeah, it's like, that's not to say that like there can't be spaces that aren't problematic, like queer spaces, but also like there is so much power in people embracing who they are and actually like feeling like they can express themselves. Like that was the best part about going to Pride for me, of like, this is what it's all about, of like actually having identity be embraced. I don't talk to everyone on the internet. Can I ask you, when did you get raided? Like an hour ago? Yes. An hour ago. This is kind of what we do here. I enjoy talking with chatters a lot. I just ask because I'm an avid chat viewer, and the fact that homie is still here 45 minutes later means you have substance to your content, not just a hairy lip. Well, thank you. Good evening, Dan. Welcome. I'm almost finished with your bracelet. So, for those who are still here, subscribers, if you subscribe here or on the Patreon, I make you a bracelet if you are interested. Because I'm cheesy and I'm like, oh, it's fun to make friendship bracelets. But then you choose the colors, and then I send it to you with a little note, a little handwritten note. But also, the Patreon has a little more of like adult type of content, so that is just a warning or an announcement, just so you all are aware. Trans, non-binary, and everyone else under the trans umbrella get demonized, else under the, for literally no reason. Yeah, like, come on, how does anybody wanting to be comfortable in their body affect you in any way, you know? Yeah, exactly. It goes for like any form of marginalization too, of like if people who are viewed as disabled, of like what that even means, of like there are many, like in many indigenous cultures where people like who are considered disabled now, like that is a form of like having access to a different experience of wisdom. So, you know, it's like it's all relative, and like who these power structures are viewing as like maintaining their power by like having the rest of the populace like point fingers at each other instead of actually pointing up, you know? Wait, how do I get a bracelet? If you mail shipping to UK. Yeah, so if you no, I'm in the US, unfortunately. I mean, sometimes it's like, ugh, we're in this world. Humans just ruin everything. I think consciousness just fucked us all over. But yeah. If you subscribe here or if you subscribe to the Patreon, I will make you a bracelet. I'm eager for the vid of the cops getting beat up. Yes, we can return to that. But yeah, that is kind of what we do here. I kind of play fast and loose with the agenda, but I think also like something that's very much missing in the world right now is like genuinely having dialogue with people. So I enjoy chatting it up with you all if you are interested, if you're saying interesting things and not being bigots, then I'm like, yeah, let's have a conversation. So that's kind of how things go around here. But yeah, it originally started with talking about the pigs, how they're awful. And they're just representative of all of these systems and enforcing these systems that they don't protect people, they protect systems. And that anyone who is marginalized, but especially with these intersections that people experience, that they are more likely to be on the receiving end of police brutality. Where are you from? Harry Lib lady? I'm not a lib. Excuse me? I'm going to interpret that as lip. I am from Utah, also, unfortunately, because it's a deeply Mormon place, and I grew up Mormon, and I don't recommend the experience. Didn't mean. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a weird place. It's where, like, I don't know if you've heard recently where, like, that one, like, Kevin O'Leary guy, he's wanting to build a huge AI data center. And it's just the funny underwear place. Yeah. We talk about that sometimes as well. That's like a major derailment that can happen, but especially in talking about like no separation of church and state, that is that is honestly like a huge like playground essentially for like the rest of this Christian nationalism that happens in the US, that like a lot of the time they like take note from what's happening in Utah and the stuff that people are able to get away with. Lib is more of an insult than calling them. I mean, honestly. That's what cost Mitt Romney style. Hello. Yeah. There is no sense of taste or style with any sort of fascists or any sort of movement, which I guess is inherently fascist, trying to impose like conforming or sameness. And that like diversity is a beautiful thing. That like this is what makes us different and unique. And like I say cheesy things like this, but also I think there is room for more sincerity in the world. Anyway, beautiful airport layover location. Yeah, it's a big airport. Kevin O'Leary removed one of my videos dunking on him from TikTok under a misinformation claim. What? If you still have like the video somewhere, like if you saved it, I would love to show it here. Let's give it some screen time. I mean, no pressure if you don't want. What are your dreams for the world? Ugh, I don't know. To not have a ruling class, that we actually have like working class solidarity, but also that it is not co-opted by people with nefarious desires, that they actually like the people who we choose as leaders, or like if there are these systems that we can somehow implement that are actually democratic, that are based much more in community and not necessarily upon like nation states, I think that can be very helpful in actually helping people to have a say in what happens in their lives. I think any sort of like representative so-called democracy is rife with people going into it for bad intentions. Excuse me. But yeah, this is why like I align with many like communistic things and anarchist things, but I also am like I can piss off everyone essentially and just say that like we need to be talking about how like any sort of movement or any sort of ideology can be used as brainwashing and as a way to co-opt revolutionary movements and take power away. I think that's just human nature. And so like I don't think there's one particular cure or fix for whatever is going on, but that like we constantly need to be questioning power structures, whatever they are. I submitted an appeal asking TikTok how it was misinformation. TikTok straight up put a ew. I hate that. I'm sorry that happened to you. It's on my YouTube. It was during the Columbia University protests. Ooh. Kevin O'Leary sucks big time. Yeah, for sure. What about micro style, not macro, just for you and your local stuffs? I mean, like organizing and like hopefully having like more labor organizing, like supporting labor unionizing and helping people take back power from the bosses, but also talking about how we need more like widespread education, I think, to even like get to a point where like locally we are not constantly undermined by our own various factions and like counterinsurgencies. where like we can't even agree that like diversity of tactics need to be applied, but some people are more willing to engage in some things than others. Like that is a huge way that we are oppressed. Democracy by way of trust me, bro. Yeah, exactly. Do you want to make minis? Mini me's? No. I think one of me is enough. One of like whatever is happening here. um I think especially like growing up, I always had like a fear of that whole process. And growing up Mormon, especially, that's kind of just what you're taught, and like being socialized female, that's just what you're taught to, like, you're good for. And I've just always had like a very deep seated fear of that whole process. And part of that is just practical because I read books and I was like, oh, this is how many people who could, like, who were giving birth died. So that's practical. That happens a lot. Um, and also, I think I have, like, there's a lot of gender dysphoria for me that's associated with all of that. Diversity of tactics agreement. I know I'm being kind of vague. Of like any sort of leftist movements that are more community based, making it so that we aren't constantly undermined by like some people being offended by the more militant factions. That like the people who are wanting to engage in more optics, like who are more like liberal in a lot of ways, like they can have a use at times, but also like how they are not willing to like confront these structures rather and like let people who are doing more of like the risk taking be collateral damage. Like that's part of the problem, I think, at least what I've come across with more like organizing efforts. Woke 1.0 is in the past. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know about that. I don't think I should be anybody's parent, but at least I have the self-awareness of that. Like I'm still figuring out like how to sleep train myself. Like what my like hunger cues are. I don't know if I and like emotional regulation and such. Anti-tanks are not useful because they don't conform or they don't confront. People are too bitter about parasocially motivated infighting drama, and those same types of people often barely acknowledge right-wing infighting. Yeah, because they don't even want to think about why a right-winger might do something redeemable in spite of other right-wingers. I agree because like this is why I think like how we're talking about like leftism and like right-wing movements, how it's like what Zach talks about um is how we need to be thinking more of like liberal versus like leftist. And then there's some people that are like, I think we need to uh be thinking about like not up, not left versus right, but like up versus down. I know there are like politicians who've like co-opted that language, which they've gotten that from more like actual like, community organizers. But yeah, interrupts their precious 3-act story structure. Yeah, exactly. It's like I think something that I've come across more recently as well, like even with like resistance and organizing around this data center, is that it's like so many different kinds of people wanting to do something, but a lot of people being reactionary and not really being involved in other types of like organizing and being like injected in the community for some reason, but they just want to like feel like they're doing something and they only care because they feel like they're personally affected, that they then can act in ways of like they appoint themselves as leaders and don't want to do things in a democratic fashion when like I am often someone who comes into spaces that's like, okay, so is the group able to vote on this? Like it shouldn't just be like a select group of people who often have proximity to whiteness and capital and patriarchy and cisness, straightness, and being able-bodied or viewed as able-bodied, that like they are the ones who are able to be like so-called leaders because they have the most amount of free time and like networks and connections and like money to even engage in this kind of stuff. And it's like that should never be how leaders are selected. Like if we are tired of these systems that are imposing non-consensual domination on all of us, that we need to be engaging in a way that directly dismantles that. I am an anti-tank. I don't think I even know what that means. Meaning just like against tanks? Like what it's sounding like? Liberals have, but in all fairness, when they say it isn't life versus left versus right, me saying life, I mean, they actually do mean that because they're saying it as a purple quadrant. Yes, that's a really good observation. I just think of tanky as violence, and the violence inherent in the system is what I have an issue with to start, and the violence as a response to violence is not the way to engage. I think it depends on like what we are defining as violence. Like any sort of like militancy can be like that has been like a huge argument with many organizing groups of like whether people can like have guns at protests. And it's like Utah is a state where people can just have guns. It's an open carry state. And so like you can't dictate what people are bringing or not. And that like the more intersections of marginalization that people experience, that can be one of the only things that like stops a cop, you know. And even then sometimes that doesn't stop a cop. So it's like, how are we protecting ourselves? And if you don't come from a particular experience where you're more likely to be on the receiving end of that violence, that's not even something that like some people should have an opinion on. It's like, that's okay if that's not for you, but it's not your place to be like, you can't do that if you haven't experienced everything that they have. Slang for militant commies. Oh, okay. Don't even need a concealed carry permit here anymore. Yeah, of like, it's all very, I think it's a much more nuanced thing to be talking about, but I think people immediately get in their feelings about it, and it's like, that's not to like to detract from like the trauma that people can experience from like this state violence, but also violence that is committed by like people in our own movements. But also like, what are we defining as violence? Because like I don't view like any sort of like makeovers to property that is violent. Like that is state owned, especially that is government owned. It's like that is not part of what it means. Like violence is like hurting life, in my opinion, and not from like a like pro-life type of state, because it's like, okay, then like whose life are we prioritizing? The one that's like already living, or the one that is like the prospect of male life, which is what it's really about, and like controlling people. Have you gone to the Great Salt Lake Flats? Yeah, I've been to the Salt Flats. There are a number of like concerts that happen out there at the Saltaire, I think is what it's called. It's like a venue. It's very stinky, but also sadly it is drying up because our government regularly like does not have like pulls back restrictions for like what water can or can't be used. Does not have any like limitations, especially when it comes to like pollutants and these oil refineries that often are making it so that like they're drying up the lake. There are all of these toxins in the lake. And so like as it's drying up, it's kicking up like arsenic and other radioactive toxins. Tankies is a term for MLs. That's MLs went onto label. A slur, which understandably makes a lot of other people who hear that go, wow, high strung as always. Sure, tanky is the new slur that people outside of this bubble haven't heard before, nor will they get the memo on the new word to not say anymore because vibes, I guess. Okay, interesting. Thank you for letting me know. The lake used to be so cool. Yeah, it was really cool. Of like, there's only 2 saline lakes in the world, and the Great Salt Lake's collapse is like collapsing the entire ecosystem of Utah. Like, Stuart Little is my son. Like, we both grew up in Utah and remember like having snow through most of the year. And now we get just like a few snowstorms a year, if that, and they never stick to the ground. So like the whole economy of like snow and snow activities that goes into that is being disrupted, but also just like the entire ecosystem, all of these various ecosystems in Utah that are dependent on the Great Salt Lake for survival. I think it could be not nice term about militant. Okay. Interesting. I mean, this is good for me to know. Thank you for the education here. That's hopefully like what I'm about. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I'm not ignorant on many things. The salty lake is what made the snow so powdery and nice here. Yeah, especially with you like being involved in like snowboarding and stuff. You would know about that. I would not. I'm not what you'd call like an outdoorsy type. They're better at organizing the most from the online left, though. I'll give them that. Probably Hassan's and ML, as well as Second Thought and everyone in the Deprogram podcast. Oh, okay. Okay. I think providing the examples, this is helping me. Thank you. I think this is great to contextualize it. Probably cuz. Yeah, exactly. Okay, interesting. Yeah. And the thing that's sad too is like realizing how most of the time when it comes to like just disgusting human rights violations, especially when it's very fascistic, not necessarily even in ideology, but like in practice of just being anti-human and wanting to create hierarchies of human dignity, that where was I going with this? Oh, that like there are many times where like having more militancy is what brings people liberation. And so like that is not always like, we shouldn't tell people who are oppressed what liberation looks like to them and what the means are that are appropriate of achieving it. So like understanding that like the people who are experiencing the most harm, which is like what like labor organizing is supposed to be about, that like people who are experiencing the most harm should have like the most say in what happens because they're often like the first to be affected and in the most severe type of manner. What is your job, IRL? That is a great question. I kind of work odd jobs, which I intentionally keep vague. But also, I used to work for the Utah State Health Department doing media work for like education on like tobacco programs and like getting resources in case people want to quit, because I came from substance use recovery and people have a much greater chance of recovering long term if they actually quit tobacco at the same time. So that is something that I have had to deal with directly, and also being in this like fascist, overtly fascist moment, being a they them, and like my last name is Sanskrit, my first name is female, of like those are intersections of marginalization that make it so like my resumes just never get seen. And with AI taking a lot of jobs, because I did a lot of media work and writing, and that like this is all being attempted to be erased, all of these aspects. So currently, like, still looking for more stable employment, but I also do this to help offset some of the costs. But if you are interested in supporting this little baby, subscriptions do help me greatly, especially if you subscribe to Patreon. That does help me. So I know everyone is kind of struggling everywhere, but yeah, that does really help me in order to keep streaming. You were going to schedule abrupt, spontaneous vacation plans for IRL stream. Probably drive. I mean, if you would be interested in subscribing, particularly to the Patreon, that would help me to make it so I even have that as a possibility, potentially. Yes, that's essentially what it is. And then I also stream to kind of like help supplement that. I'm keeping things vague intentionally. So we can leave it at that. But there are definitely days where I like don't know if I'm able to stream as much or if I can sustain it, just because of everything going on and like trying to focus energy on like job applications and stuff. The transport to get there is hard too. Yes, and also just like the means to get there, of like affording things. So that's me just being honest. So if you all happen to like what I do in the stream, and especially if you feel like you are gaining something of value, that I would appreciate a subscription, or a subscription to Patreon, or if you're not able to do that, like a follow, that would help me as well. But yeah. Okay, should we continue with the video? We won't be able to finish this today before we get into the reading, but I did want to get in some of this because this does look like it has some great stuff for us to dig into.
Going to get into these questions more specifically later in the video, but I want to start off by making it clear that the way it is now is not the way it has always been.
Thank you.
There have been so many different ways that laws
Oxpecker.
or societal rules were enforced, different ways people were
Thank
punished
you very
for crimes.
much. I
and just
greatly
because we live
appreciate
under the
it.
system now does not mean that it always has to be this way. And obviously, I'm not advocating for these systems to be implemented today in our world, but still, just talking about them can serve as a reminder that it used to be different, and that it can be different again. We think of the police as people who you either call and they come to you, or they patrol the streets of your city or your town, or they exist as some type of quote-unquote security presence in front of events or protests. But for a lot of history, this wasn't the case because it didn't really make sense. For example, in Europe during the Middle Ages, the vast majority of the population lived in rural peasant communities where virtually everyone knew each other. For a long time, men used to take turns volunteering as a sort of night watchman, and on the occasion they did see someone committing a crime, a hue and cry could be initiated where they would call out, and the entire village, or at least the men of the village, would come out and try to apprehend the accused criminal. And of course, this ranges from where in Europe you were and when during the Middle Ages you lived, because law enforcement was a bit more organized for a person living under a lord in the Holy Roman Empire, for example, where the person watching over a village on land that belonged to a lord was typically acting as private law enforcement on behalf of the lord. And then moving on from examples of volunteer and community-based forms of law enforcement, I'll talk about the Roman Empire. The law enforcement here was an organized group of men called vigiles, and they didn't serve as law enforcement per se, but instead more as general night watchmen. So they would patrol the streets of Rome at night, and if they happened to see a thief or a crime
I
take
don't know
place,
much
they
about
would
this
approach and
history
apprehend the
in
person,
Rome,
but
so
this was
this is
not really their
interesting.
main goal. These groups would patrol the streets of Rome at night, usually just to keep an eye out for any potential fires, and also to catch runaway slaves. So instead of serving as people who were out explicitly to look for criminals, they were mostly out to make sure that no property was being damaged. And then, of course, protesting didn't exist as we know it today because freedom of speech was not an idea that was part of Roman society, but whenever a riot or a revolt did happen, it was typically violent, and usually a part of the Roman army would be sent in on behalf of the emperor or the magistrate to violently suppress the people. The very last group I want to mention is 19th century Cherokee society. Now, unfortunately, and for obvious reasons, not as much in-depth research has been done on societies of the various Native American groups throughout the Americas, especially before colonization, but I did manage to find some research papers that did mention some ways that rules were enforced within different Cherokee clans. So although there wasn't an overall Cherokee national government, and they didn't have an explicit book of laws that they would follow, every town would have a local council of people who would convene to settle local disputes. As for a crime like murder, it was seen as an offense on behalf of one clan towards another clan, and not a crime between two individuals. And the way for the two clans to be equal again would be left up to a discussion. For example, one clan could ask the offending clan for some sort of trade, or they would request that someone would be killed. And it's notable to mention that the purpose of the killing wasn't exactly punishment per se, but to restore an imbalance between two communities. So even though the person who had actually committed the murder could be killed as punishment, it also wasn't uncommon for an older member of the clan or their family who was already approaching death to volunteer as the person to die. And Ken Treisman, the author...
Yeah, and I'm sure this also, can be extremely different between tribes, and how even within tribes, like a particular nation that practices and enforcement of law, I'm not familiar with when it comes to enforcement of law, really, with outside people, but just creating more of these principles to be guiding the community, that this can vary greatly even within tribal nations. It just shows the huge diversity that exists there. Just wanted to call that out.
Of this paper does mention that murder was a very uncommon crime within the Cherokee community, that most
Oh, that's
homicides were the
cool.
result of hunting accidents, and that other
Cherokee was your
crimes such as
tribe?
stealing were also extremely uncommon, especially because virtually everything was communally owned, and any Cherokee who had to travel could find another nearby Cherokee group who would provide them with food and shelter. So although other Native American groups, like some of the Great Plains Indian tribes, had a role in the community that could be similar to a police officer, other groups like the Cherokee had very different ways of enforcing rules and preventing crime. Now, like I said in the beginning, I'm not saying any of these forms of law enforcement were good or fair, but it's still important to talk about because throughout all the years of human histories, the people who lived in Rome or under feudalism where law enforcement was tied to your lord, or in the Inca Empire, all these people thought that the way they interacted with the law was normal, that that's just how it is. But in reality, these societies developed in the way most beneficial to them. But how did we get from all these different societies' ways of law enforcement to the policing system that exists in almost the entire world today? Well, like many horrible things in today's world, we have the British to thank for that. The British Empire, like any empire, had to keep a well-trained and well-funded army to protect itself from any threats, whether those threats be from other states or the citizens within the empire and its colonies. For a long time, Great Britain had a system of constables and watchmen, especially in the bigger cities like London. But it wasn't a centrally organized system, just small groups who organized on behalf of and paid by wealthy people living in the area. And whenever a group of workers wanted to go on strike or start a riot, they would have to send the military in to stop it, something that would take a lot of effort, time, and money,
Juniper's
and something
meowing
that very
outside.
often resulted in lots of violent deaths. Now, if you think poor Londoners in the 1800s had a reason to
Neighbor
protest,
was
the Irish had reasons
Mormon
to
and
riot.
6'8" over
Obviously,
the
the
dudes on
British couldn't just
bikes.
send a bunch of the army to crush the Irish every time one of them got it in their heads that they deserved human rights and national independence. The
Yeah,
army was busy fighting
missionaries.
Napoleon.
I did the
So
white
the
shirt and
empire
bike
did what made
thing.
sense for it to
Yeah,
continue
I
operating
didn't do
as
that
is. Before this time
specifically.
period, the army
I did
was
a
the
mission
defense
where I
from
was
any
up
threat to the state.
singing and
But after this,
dancing,
the army
and it
became
was
concerned
also
almost
miserable, but
exclusively
just in
with
different
foreign
ways.
threats. Domestic threats or threats to the state from
Just
its own citizens began to
propaganda
be assigned to the
and
police. Before
brainwashing.
long, various different policing
It's
organizations
brutal.
would be established throughout Ireland, from the Dublin Police to the Peace Preservation Police and the Irish Constabulary, all with the intent
I'm
not to
gonna let
protect the
Juniper
people they
in.
were policing,
If
but
the
to
door is
enforce
not
law and order on a group
open
of colonized
slightly
people who were
enough,
rightfully
she
rebelling against
won't
their
come in,
occupiers.
even though she
The
can
policing
push it
was
with her
working so
head.
well that a British military officer by the name of Hugh Rose claimed, "No system of police has ever worked better for the suppression of political agitation or agrarian disorder than the Irish Constabulary." Now, the ruling class of Britain, and especially those in London, saw this and began to construct an idea about how to suppress the citizens, not in the colonies, but within the empire itself. In the early 1800s, people in London were poor, they frequently rioted, the monarchy was increasingly unpopular, and the landowners began to fear an actual revolution. Unsurprisingly, this led to a law passing which officially created the London Metropolitan Police in 1829, a police force who would use the same tactics of political suppression on British citizens. There are three people responsible for the writing and passing of this bill that created the modern police force. The first is Robert Peel, known as the father of policing, a future prime minister, and the son of a man described
We'll
as
see if
one
she
of the
hops up
richest
here.
textile manufacturers of the early
How old
Industrial
were you?
Revolution. The second is Arthur Wellesley, another future prime minister who was born to
Dudes
the
who people
Protestant
are
ascendancy,
like
basically the ruling
conditioned to
class
be
of Ireland
male.
that owned the land and the factories
It
and
used to
collaborated
be
with the
they had to
British to
be
keep Ireland under
19.
colonial rule. The third and final man
And then
responsible for
around
the bill
like
is
our
Henry
age,
Auburn,
it
a
changed
chancellor and a
to
slave owner who owned sugar
18,
plantations
and
across
then
Jamaica. So the son of one of the wealthiest people alive at the time, a
women could
trader and a
go
slave
at
owner,
the age
couldn't
of
have been a more fitting group
19,
of people to
when
create the
before
police.
they waited
These
till
three men had a
21.
different connection to each other, however.
And that was something that like goes to show the level of pressure of getting married for people who are socialized female, especially, is like there was this kind of cultural thing of like, oh, if you aren't married by the time you're 21, then you go on a mission. So then it was kind of viewed that whoever went on a mission and they were socialized female, that they're like, oh, they're kind of these old maids, or they aren't as appealing. No, actually. There is like zero sexual activity happening. I was 19 when I went on mine. I know Stuart Little's my son was 18 when he went on his mission. And yeah, they're brutal. They've changed all sorts of rules since then because they have just been hemorrhaging membership, especially when it comes to younger people. But I am 31 now. I'm turning 32 this year. So it's been a while.
Being they were all involved in the founding and facilitating of the original policing system imposed on Ireland. The London Metropolitan Police's first commissioner was a military officer named
Working on
Charles
doors
Rowan,
with
who had
bikes.
spent
Oh, I
some
thought
of
that's
his
what you
career
were
in Ireland,
meaning.
a qualification that was
Missionary
specifically
style.
requested by Robert Peel. Other empires
Or am
quickly
I
began to
like
take
not
note of
picking
the
up
way
on
the
the
British had
joke?
adapted its police force meant for colonial occupation to one that it could unleash on its own citizens whenever they wanted to strike. The USA was particularly interested and soon started organizing its own police force in various cities. A few years after the British had established the first modern police force, similar forces were established in New York, Boston, and Chicago, with other major US cities following soon after. But the US had some additional influences. In the southern states of the US, or the ones where slavery was more common and used for longer, influences were slowly carried over from slave catchers. As the Civil War came to an end, these slave patrols were disbanded, but the people who worked in them, mostly slave owners and veterans of the Confederate Army, joined the newly established police force to enforce the Black Codes, newly passed laws that restricted Black people's right to own land and businesses and to keep them out of white-only public spaces. These Black Codes eventually became the Jim Crow laws that the police were used to enforce as well. This may shed some light on America's highly racialized version of policing, but it isn't the only influence on American police. During the American occupation of the Philippines, the army wasn't fighting a traditional war on the battlefield, but a guerrilla war. So instead of fighting a traditional war, the army had to adapt. First, they took a map and established hot zones, areas where a bigger potential threat could rise, and created smaller mobile units who could be deployed in raids or in gunfights at moment's notice. Second, they created a network of counterintelligence units dedicated to monitoring civilians, identifying possible future insurgents, and tracking down Filipino revolutionaries. It should not come as a surprise that members of the American army that occupied the Philippines, like
There
August
she
Vollmer,
is,
would return back
making
to
an
the US and
appearance.
join the police force with new ideas about how the same tactics could be used against American citizens. First, he would
From,
implement the
like,
same
door
tactics
to
used by the
door.
army in the Philippines, mobilize his police force so they could conduct raids at
Underwear and alien. If there was like any sort of like alien thing happening, that would make it much more interesting. Christian stuff style. I mean, Mormons are extremely repressed. Hello, Aliana. Welcome. How are you doing? Is the aliens just Scientology and not Mormon? I mean, it's not very Mormon, but I mean, could be. if you think about how weird everyone is, then yes. But yeah, I do think the alien stuff is specifically a little more Scientology. But there is a lot of crossover with Scientology with the amount of like grift and like high pressure sales tactics and um just like a lot of brainwashing in general. What about you? I'm doing all right. You know, just like earlier, we were talking about cops showing up at Pride without police. And so now we're talking about the history of policing in how it relates to the US, but also with these like colonizer tactics of what this means. Ugh, these pictures are really hard to look at. I hate cops. Yeah, exactly. A cab. I still saved that one like line you had about pigs. I think you need to keep writing in that vein. It was very good. I'm going to be on disability pay by the end of the month. Then okay, nice. I'm glad that you're getting that disability pay. The grift is the overlap, not the aliens.
Moment's notice and set up
Yeah,
his own
and also
intelligence
just like
operations
the
that would be part of the
oppression.
police department, aimed at identifying and tracking down any potential threats. Seeing how successful this was, he was invited to travel from city to city and instruct other police departments around the country to implement this same structure.
I
His
went
tactics were so
to
similar to an occupation army's that
BYU,
an American reporter
unfortunately,
remarked that Vollmer put into effect some of the methods he
for
used in chasing
LARPing.
river pirates
I
on the
got you.
Pasig and bushwhackers in the steaming wild jungle.
I know. I mean,
Soon, other
fancy
countries
leather.
began to
That
take
sounds
note and
cool.
copy the police systems created by the British and the Americans, each of them implementing policies and organizations created by empires
Yeah,
to
I went
oppress
to
colonized
BYU and it
people,
was
but on their
bleak.
own citizens. That war,
In the US, people.
by the
Jeez, these
way, the one
pictures
that
are
Americans
really
decided used an occupying force so effective they wanted to employ it on their own
awful.
citizens, resulted in the deaths
Which,
of an estimated
that's what
200,000
history
civilians.
is. Okay. My first guess was right. Yeah. I went to BYU. It's weird. Something that I've been calling out recently is like there is more talk with like all of these fascist Christian nationalists in the US trying to say, Juniper, he always tries to drink my water, and I don't. I give you fresh water, bug. I think she's just like, well, that's mine. You do that, that's mine too. Huh. Um, so these white Christian nationalists, they're talking about creating marriage camps because of all of the hysteria with uh with white birth rates. And you know what? I've said this before, but like maybe if these like white Christian nationalists actually fucked more, they wouldn't have such low birth rates. But because that's not what it's about control and oppressing people and using it as an excuse to demonize non-white people who they view as being non-white or racialized people, just marginalized people in general, that they're like, oh, we have to use this. But yeah, it's like maybe if you actually were not so puritanical and removed those sticks from your asses, you might be having more kids potentially. But yeah, so these people are talking about creating marriage camps, and I'm like, Mormons have already done that. That's what BYU is. Like any of the like Mormon schools, because like I had roommates by the time they were like 19 who thought they were like washed up and that they weren't ever going to get married, and they would be extremely depressed about it. And it's like all of this pressure to get married really young to make it so that they are just part of this whole system where they're dependent on the church for things, and they have kids very early, and that also is a form of oppression. Yeah, the Puritan values will get you. You could guess me too, I'm sure. To be honest, at Michigan State, could you go there?
Now that we've
I'm not
established
familiar
the
with all of
origins
the
of
schools
modern
in
day
Michigan,
policing,
if
we
you
can
still
get
went
into the
there.
crux of the video. When a person says something like, all cops are bastards, to a person who isn't really politically engaged at all, the reaction is most of the time something like, sure, some police are bad, but those are just individuals. Without the police, who would be there to protect us? Some people have
Nice.
even compared saying ACAB to racism, saying it's a form of discrimination. So, the rest of this video will go over two things. In this part, we will discuss the function of police in modern society, what they have
Yeah, in
historically been
Melbourne.
used for, and why the police are essential to maintaining the status quo. In the next part, we will discuss how effective the police is at actually stopping crime, how the money used to fund police departments could be
Look at these little shitheads. Them, like, engaging in black bloc tactics, feeling like they have to be so tough, cover their faces, be armed to the hilt, and brutalize people. Like, how cowardly do you have to fucking be to engage in this kind of behavior? Like, how scared of a person do you have to be to just, like, not actually be able to go toe to toe with someone who is not engaged in all of this bullshit? But that's, again, not the point. It's like, the amount of, like, I don't want to shame people with, like, small dicks, but, like, that's the energy it's giving. It just is, like, such small. I guess then that's also just shaming height. It's just so cowardly. There's no backbone to it because it's like there is just this constant fear mongering and them wanting to feel like they are tough and superior. But like the rest of these people who are abusing power and systems of power, they're deeply insecure losers. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. They don't have principles. They aren't invested in shared humanity because look at the results. Look at what they're doing. So July 10th sounds like a good buffet day. What does that mean?
utilized to prevent crime, and briefly touch on the future of policing. To start off, I'm going to use an analogy that was put forth by professor at Princeton University, Kiyanga Yamada-Taylor. Imagine a baked cake is modern-day policing. It's had a lot of different influences, or ingredients that make up what it is today, how it functions. As discussed, the origins of
This
policing
is a
have had
great
lots of
analogy.
influences. From more successfully organizing the oppression of colonized people in Ireland and the Philippines, to putting down labor strikes and riots in London, to catching slaves and enforcing racial segregation laws in the United States. Each of these influences is an ingredient that has been used to bake the cake of modern-day policing. But once the cake has been baked, you cannot separate the ingredients from the final product. As discussed in part 1, both the military and the police force are used to protect the state from threats. The military is for foreign threats, and the police are meant for you. These are the arms of the state which will physically impose and carry out its will. But hold on, you say. I don't want to overthrow the government, so I don't have anything to worry about. Well, it is.
Well, do you exist in a place where it has cops? You might want to rethink that. But something I was going to say earlier that I didn't get around to when they were talking about the Philippines is that like this type of imperialist colonizing violence that is done abroad by colonizers is always returned. Like there the concept of the like imperialist boomerang, but that's not just with like empires. That's just like any sort of like colonizer tactics of trying to have all of these violent measures be tried out in areas that are particularly done to indigenous populations, populations with more melanin in their skin, and then used to reinforce the tactics that are done at home. And especially when there is crossover with the racializing that is involved, that all of that is a factor, but how it's like not exclusive to empires. Fly to Jim Buffet.
Isn't just overthrowing the government that falls under protecting the state. It should be pretty uncontroversial to say that the United States and the other countries of Europe are capitalist countries, which means they have many laws that regulate how you exchange your labor for money. The police are there to make sure people follow the law. So what happens, for
And
example,
we
if you are
also exist
protesting
in
for better
global
labor conditions?
capitalism.
In
And so, like,
1893
all
Chicago,
countries
workers of the
engage
Pullman Palace Car
in
Company were
this in one
facing
way or
literal
another.
starvation. 16-hour workdays, meager wages, and
It's
to make it all
just a
worse,
matter of, like,
George
to what
Pullman, the
degree.
company's president, wasn't just their employer, but also their landlord, since they, as well as their families, all lived in a nearby worker town where they would earn money from and pay rent to the same person. An economic depression was coming, and like all capitalists, Pullman decided to freeze rent prices but decrease wages by 25%. The workers, with the help of
I
the
mean,
American Railway Union, organized a boycott of Pullman train cars and a
we'll
massive
see.
strike, with around
We'll see.
100,000 people participating in the strikes for better working conditions. Obviously, this couldn't continue. The
If
business
I'm
was losing
able
money, and other
to
business owners started getting nervous that their workers would get similar ideas. But these strikers weren't committing any
maintain
crimes, and
my
they weren't hurting anybody.
everyday
So what did they
living
do? The government
expenses,
changed
we'll
the
see
law.
if that's
Equity
even
judges
a
also had to contend with the
possibility.
union's argument that boycotts worked no injury to employers' property. To answer it, the court changed equity's very definition of the term. In place of the inherited view limiting property rights primarily to tangible objects, they adopted the definition that held property to be anything that had pecuniary or exchangeable value, including a man's business or labor. Because boycotts and strikes injured the employer's profit-making activities and therefore their pecuniary interests, they trenched on the employer's property. It wouldn't take long for around 8,000 police officers, supported by 6,000 members of the US military, to suppress the strikers. At first, the union leaders welcomed the presence of the police because they thought it would mean that the strike would continue
Yeah,
more
that's a
organized than it
mistake.
had been before. But the police
That also goes to show, like, we're the union leaders in this particular situation, also part of, like, the manager class, or, like, it can be representative as well of people using these types of leadership positions, like, not necessarily in, like, the best faith of ways, or if, like, they were engaging in good faith, that they aren't the ones who were feeling like they would be most at risk with a police presence there. That, like, there can be that disparity. So I made that last stanza about cops as an ode to an ex-fascist group that I recently found out turned fascist. The anti-fascist group turned fascist? That is a story. I mean, I don't work there anymore. Technically, I mean, unemployed in many ways. But yes, I do want to see these stanzas, Aliana.
police began to fire into the crowd of strikers, many of them who were there with their wife and their children. One of the judges involved in sending the police and the military to put down the strike would write in a letter, "They have killed only 6 as of yet. This is hardly enough to make an impression. Until they have had much bloodletting, it will not get better." That judge's name was William Howard Taft, who would become the 27th president of the United States just a few years later.
Is
30 people would
Taft
end up dying while
the
the police
the
fought strikers,
bathtub guy?
and many more were wounded.
He died
This
in a
is not a
bathtub,
one-off case
I
either.
think.
In April 1920, 17 unarmed striking miners were shot in the back by a group of police officers in
Bathtub.
what became known as
Yeah.
the Anaconda Road Massacre.
Oh, wait.
September 1897, in the
Oh,
Latimer
it's an
Massacre,
urban
a group
legend?
of striking immigrant workers from Lithuania and Poland were
Oh,
massacred by
it's
the
just being
police. The Ludlow
fatphobic.
Massacre
That's
of
what it was.
1914, police
Okay.
fired into a
The
crowd
more
of
you
strikers,
know.
killing 66 people, 11 of them children. The Columbine Mine Massacre of
Which
1927
doesn't mean he
resulted
wasn't
again in the police firing into a
a
crowd of
bathtub
people,
guy.
killing 6
Which
and
doesn't
injuring
mean that
dozens.
he wasn't a
The General
harmful
Steel Strike of
person.
1919, 18 strikers killed. The 1920 Alabama Coal Strike, 16 strikers killed. The Little Steel Strike of 1937.
Wearing my barong, roasting lechon like it's New Year's, trying to make these fascists feel a new fear. My bullets punch like a boxer who's on gear. Fucking payload on asses. Call me bombardier. Ooh. I like that. Aliana, I don't know why you've said in the past that you don't have artistic abilities. I think you need to keep writing. Second grade teacher shamed me for my haiku. Oh. Yeah, I mean, teachers can shame us out of a lot of things. Feel free to steal my lyrics and turn. Ooh. yeah, I'm gonna save these, even if it's just to compile and be like, hey, this is what frequent chatter has said. I do like to show off all of your talents. This does not mean that I will always show off what is being shared if I don't like it. Just throwing that out there. But I do have uh I do reserve that right. Hello, Anarcho Taco. Welcome. Eating pasta? Nice. We're talking about the history of pig tactics. Which honestly, like, it started out with like Roman Empire stuff, but also mentioned, in the Cherokee Nation, like various aspects of enforcing law. But like I think as long as like humankind has existed, there has been more of this idea of like wanting to create laws and impose them on people. I mean, there are certain systems that are much more oppressive and discriminatory and violent than others, which is why it's important for us to be talking about colonizers, especially. In fairness, it was kind of spicy. You were in second grade. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, if I ever share these, I'll be sure to just say that it is just a chatter, so you weren't tied to it. Okay, I'll do that. But thank you for sharing. Yay, I love when you share your art.
10 strikers killed. I can go on, but I'd like to point out that these are only the strikes that resulted in a mass killing. There are dozens upon dozens of strikes where only the head of the union or individual strikers were killed, and even more where the police beat and intimidated workers into submission. In these cases, you can clearly tell that the police's objective is not to protect people, but to enforce the law that keeps the strikers in meager wages and long working hours, and to protect the profit of the business owners. This is not a US-centric problem either. The police in Britain, France, Germany, and Italy have long been used to put down strikes and to coerce workers to continue working in unbearable working conditions.
Yeah, hello. Capitalism. Ta-da! Yeah, that is just colonizer behavior and being like, nope, you have to keep working. But also just goes to show how like it just is emphasizing the protection of systems. How they're like, oh, cops protect people. And it's like, no, that's never been the case. It is protecting these systems that are inherently violent, and then they are the disposable little soldiers that execute it in very violent ways.
18, during the end of World War I, during the German Revolution, there was a massive societal unrest and an increase in support for a more worker-focused form of government. So, what did the police do? They sided with the state and the various right-wing paramilitary groups to fight against labor organizations, all of which resulted in the massacre of 19 civilians who took part in the International Workers' Day demonstration.
Accidentally left the
None
bar
of this
without
is
paying for my
surprising, of course,
beer.
because only a few years later, the
I mean,
German
it's
police
not
would
too
become
late
an
to
enthusiastic
go
part
back.
of Nazi Germany's system of oppression, which allowed them more powers than they previously
Cops
had,
protect
and encouraged violence
people.
against communists, Jews, Romani people, and other opponents of
Or
Nazi rule.
areas,
To make the
yes.
police seem as if they were honorable keepers of the peace,
Exactly.
the Nazis printed propaganda posters.
Yeah, and how it's usually just like associated with whiteness, like it cannot be separated from the racializing and who is viewed as able-bodied and like the targeting of queer people. Like I saw not too long ago, there was like this Reddit thread of cops talking about them trying to like pick up like especially dudes, because whatever, but I mean not exclusively to dudes, but like cops intentionally pulling people over because, or they are pulling people over because they wanted to hit on them. Yay! Thank you, Stuart Little is my son, with the gifted subs. This helps me a great deal. Thank you very much. They open tomorrow. Yeah. You then maybe even just like putting a note or something. Big Stew. Thank you. Thank you very much. Pulls woman over, brushes hand against threatens you with ticket if you complain. Yeah, exactly. Gropes you in saying like, "Oh, this is like stop and frisk." It just is insane the shit they're able to get away with. Reddit got extra fascist. Even post. Great mod purge. Yeah, I've never been like a frequent Reddit poster or viewer of any sort, but to celebrate, I think we'll watch the rest of this tomorrow just so that we can get to more things. But to celebrate all of the subs and gifted subs for today, shall I show you a song that I've been listening to that I enjoy? I'm needing something a little more lighthearted, celebratory before we transition into the Communist Manifesto, because like same, also transing. Hassan Minhaj. It's a great video about how Gen Z is bringing about a Luddite revival. I love that. I love that there is now people actually understanding what Luddite means. It doesn't mean just like resistance to technology. It's like actually destroying the means of production. Okay. We'll watch that tomorrow. I like Lemmy, decentral version of Reddit. I've never heard of that. Interesting. I never even knew what a Luddite was. Play that Theo Katzman song. Oh no, I didn't. I didn't get around to it that week. Okay, so this is a song that's older, but I've been listening to more recently. The drumming, I don't know what, if he says Cassius, what their identity is, what their pronouns are, but, or if they're indigenous, but like the beat also seems to be like a drum circle almost. So that feels much more rooted in like indigenous tradition. I would hope that like if he isn't, he's actually like giving credit to and also like compensation to indigenous people who actually created the art form. So I would have had to go through your VODs. True. I usually also try to split things up in, because I've been posting them to YouTube, of like for Culture Corner. If I go over music, I usually will include it in like that playlist and cut that up. Anarcho Taco, this song was reminding me of when you were talking about your raver days as well. Completed a level 2 hype train. Who's this diva emote? That's cute. I did not choose this language. That's just what was put in the chat for me. So I'm not saying choo choo. We did it! Meeting our goal. I used to tell my mom it was an all techno dance party and I would find a payphone. Damn. How old are you exactly? And if you weren't comfortable, you don't have to say. I've been thinking about doing something on the Patreon of having like a DJ set, me trying out some DJ stuff, of like having a little dance party, because I like to show music just on the stream, but like also encouraging dancing if you want to be doing that in your own locales. I don't know. Let me know if that sounds interesting. Oh, 44, nice. Oh, whoops. I opened that link. Ooh. Okay. I have some things to be showing. I'll save this for Friday. Thank you all for the recommendation. Tiny Desk from the Philharmonic. That sounds super fun. I'll also play that on Friday. The song is called Brotherhood. Maybe we just call this Siblinghood if we're going gender neutral, which I prefer. I'll share the link in the chat. I also like to share the links in the Discord if you're interested in joining. Is this working or no? Why is this not working at the moment? I think sometimes when it's in full screen, it wigs out. There we go. Ooh, Cotton by Vince Staples. That whole album of his is really good, that new album. Okay. We have some things that we'll be going over for Culture Corner on Friday. Thank you, everyone. Yay. All right. Shall we finish the address to the Central Committee of the Communist League? In my version, it is included with the manifesto of the Communist Party. But colloquially, both of these things are often included in what is called the Communist Manifesto. Just joined. And you're welcome here. Thank you for being here. Yeah, that whole Vince Staples album is really good. He is a really talented artist. Okay. So, we previously were reading this, and it was talking about the various movements that have been going on, like specifically in Germany, but also in some other areas. It mostly is talking about how, like, movements can morph and mutate over time, and how they can be co opted, especially by the ruling class. So, for this particular, oh, where was I? Okay. I think this is where I ended. Um yeah, so this is talking about the attitude of the proletariat and the goals that they have in mind at the time, especially. So just picking up a little bit from before. The question, therefore, arises as to what the attitude of the proletariat, and in particular of the League, will be in relation to it, meaning petty bourgeois democracy. So if we're thinking about like that in terms now, people who are like maybe a little more invested in electoralism at times, or just stopping at electoralism and not engaging in outside pressure as much, and talking about dismantling these systems at their core. During the continuance of the present conditions, number one, during the continuance of the present conditions where the petty bourgeois Democrats are likewise oppressed. 2. In the next revolutionary struggle, which will give them the upper hand. 3. After this struggle, during the period of preponderance over the overthrown classes and the proletariat. 1. At the present moment, when the democratic petty bourgeois are everywhere oppressed, they preach in general unity and reconciliation to the proletariat. They offer it in their hand and strive for the establishment of a large opposition party, which will embrace all shades of opinion in the Democratic Party. That is, they strive to entangle the workers in a party organization in which general social democratic phrases predominate, behind which their special interests are concealed, and in which the particular demands of the proletariat may not be brought forward for the sake of beloved peace. Such a union would turn out solely to their advantage and altogether to the disadvantage of the proletariat. The proletariat would lose its whole independent, laboriously achieved position and once more sink down to being an appendage of the official bourgeois democracy. Yeah, essentially just like using the working class and unionizing and community organizing in order to get votes, get into the halls of power. I'm kinda lumpin' prole with literate tendencies myself. I don't think I know what that means. You all are always bringing up words that I'm not familiar with. This is exciting. Lumpin'. Oh, lumpin' proletariat. The unorganized and unpolitical lower orders of society who are not interested in revolutionary advancement. Oh, okay. Interesting. I didn't know that was the specific terminology for that idea. That also reveals as well some of the like anarchist tendencies, as your username implies, of like the unpolitical lower orders. Is there, like, out of curiosity, what is the resistance that you have to revolutionary advancement specifically? If you feel like that's something you align with that concept. Okay. Such a union would turn out solely to their advantage, and altogether to the disadvantage of the proletariat. The proletariat would lose its whole independent, laborious, oh, we already read that. This union must, therefore, be most decisively rejected. Instead of once again stooping to serve as the applauding chorus of the bourgeois democrats, the workers, and above all, the League, must exert themselves to establish an independent, secret, and public organization of the Workers' Party alongside of the official democrats, and make each section the central point and nucleus of workers' societies, in which the attitude and interests of the proletariat will be discussed independently of bourgeois influences. How far the bourgeois democrats are from seriously considering an alliance in which the proletarians would stand side by side with them with equal power and equal rights is shown, for example, by the Breslau Democrats, who in their organ, the Neue Oder Zeitung, most furiously attack the independently organized workers, whom they style socialists. In the case of a struggle against a common adversary, no special union is required. As soon as such an adversary has to be fought directly, the interests of both parties, for the moment, coincide, and as previously, so also in the future, this connection, calculated to last only for the moment, will arise of itself. It is self-evident that in the impending bloody conflicts, as in all earlier ones, it is the workers who, in the main, will have to win the victory by their courage, determination, and self-sacrifice. As previously, so also in this struggle, the mass of the petty bourgeois will, as long as possible, remain hesitant, undecided, and inactive, and then, as soon as the issue has been decided, will seize the victory for themselves, will call upon the workers to maintain tranquility and return to their work, will guard against so-called excesses and bar the proletariat from the fruits of victory. It is not in the power of the workers to prevent the petty bourgeois democrats from doing this, but it is in their power to make it difficult for them to gain the upper hand against the armed proletariat, and to dictate such conditions to them that the rule of the bourgeois democrats will from the outset bear within it the seeds of their downfall, and that their subsequent extrusion by the rule of the proletariat will be considerably facilitated. Above all things, the workers must counteract as much as it is at all possible during the conflict and immediately after the struggle, the bourgeois endeavors to allay the storm, and must compel the Democrats to carry out their present terrorist phases. Their terrorist phrases. I love that. Lumpen is a wee bit of a joke. I have resistance to Vanguard Revolution. Can't uninstall a Vanguard that self-installs. I mean, that's I think a good point. State can't wither without building dual power to offload function. Now, I agree with that, especially if, like, you actually... I think it kind of plays into this, or it's correcting this idea that many people think of anarchism as is, like, just wanting to burn the world down. And, like, there are some anarchists that want that, just people who want that, but also it's about like what is there to replace it, and that like if we just want chaos, inevitably the people who have the most without any sort of like organized structure that allows people to have a voice equally, that there are people who have access to capital, people who are in the ruling class, they often will just take advantage of the chaos and use it for their own means to just keep these systems of oppression going. Who is this writer? This is Marx and Engels, specifically. Their actions must be so aimed as to prevent the direct revolutionary excitement from being suppressed again immediately after the victory. On the contrary, they must keep it alive as long as possible. Far from opposing so-called excesses, instances of popular revenge against hated individuals, or public buildings that are associated only with hateful recollections, such instances must not only be tolerated, but the leadership of them taken in hand. During the struggle and after the struggle, the workers must, at every opportunity, put forward their own demands alongside of the demands of the bourgeois democrats. They must demand guarantees for the workers as soon as the democratic bourgeois set about taking over the government. If necessary, they must obtain these guarantees by force, and in general, they must see to it that the new rulers pledge themselves to all possible concessions and promises, the surest way to compromise them. In general, they must in every way restrain, as far as possible, the intoxication of victory and the enthusiasm for the new state of things, which make their appearance after every victorious street battle, by a calm and dispassionate estimate of the situation, and by unconcealed mistrust in the new government. Alongside of the new official governments, they must establish simultaneously their own revolutionary workers' governments, whether in the form of municipal committees and municipal councils, or in the form of workers' clubs or workers' committees, so that the bourgeois democratic governments not only immediately lose the support of the workers, but from the outset see themselves supervised and threatened by authorities which are backed by the whole mass of the workers. In a word, from the first moment of victory, mistrust must be directed no longer against the conquered reactionary party, but against the workers' previous allies, against the party that wishes to exploit the common victory for itself alone. Yeah, so in this particular instance, it's talking about, like, so if there's a successful revolution that happens, that there needs to be some sort of body that is built to make it so that workers are still empowered and they're holding leaders accountable. But this also is kind of highlighting some of the drawbacks of representative types of hierarchies anyway. That, I mean, it's hard to come by anything that is especially widespread with like mass amounts of people, that there isn't some sort of like representative ways of governance. But it also is just highlighting that, like, if you are dependent on people, just like individual people, rather than listening to the voice of the voice of the workers and the masses, everyday people, that like it is just opening it up to the like personal inclinations, biases, corruption of individuals and bad actors who want to just co-opt these means for their own self-enrichment. Anarchism is such a huge umbrella. Yeah, it is. Specifically, I go with anarchism without adjective, its own pluralist thing. It says if I impose anarcho-communism, it can't be anarchism. Municipal clubs. What is that IRL? Support strengthening municipal dual power governance, then shift towards federated regional autonomy. Yeah, so like various bodies where it's talking about like these smaller groups that are organized to hold these leaders who are in positions of power accountable. Kinda. It's talking about it in not as much of a like top-down situation, of where it's like more led by workers themselves. Two. I'm hearing Juniper, but I wasn't seeing her. 2. But in order to be able energetically and threateningly to oppose this party, whose treachery to the workers will begin from the first hour of victory, the workers must be armed and organized. The arming of the whole proletariat with rifles, muskets, cannon, and munitions must be put through at once. The revival of the old citizens' guard directed against the workers must be resisted. However, where the latter is not feasible, the workers must attempt to organize themselves independently as a proletarian guard with commanders elected by themselves, and with a general staff of their own choosing, and to put themselves at the command not of the state authority, but of the revolutionary community councils which the workers will have managed to get adopted. Where workers are employed at the expense of the state, they must see that they are armed and organized in a separate corps with commanders of their own choosing, or as a part of the proletarian guard. Yeah, because it's trying to prevent the concept of the state gathering enough power and resistance to quell workers and any sort of resistance that is necessary to hold people accountable, to make it so that there is a power balance. Where did I leave off? What functions do they perform and how much central control is on them? You might need to strengthen or replace and dismantle. Yeah. However, where the latter is not feasible, the workers must attempt to organize themselves independently as a proletarian guard with commanders elected by themselves. Wait, I already read that. Oh, well, I'll just continue. And with a general staff of their own choosing, and to put themselves at the command not of the state authority, but of the revolutionary community councils which the workers will have managed to get adopted. Where workers are employed at the expense of the state, they must see that they are armed and organized in a separate corps with commanders of their own choosing, or as part as the proletarian guard. Arms and ammunition must not be surrendered on any pretext. Any attempt at disarming must be frustrated, if necessary, by force. Destruction of the influence of the bourgeois democrats upon the workers, immediate, independent, and armed organization of the workers, and the enforcement of conditions as difficult and compromising as possible upon the inevitable momentary rule of the bourgeois democracy. These are the main points which the proletariat, and hence the League, must keep in view during and after the impending insurrection. 3. As soon as the new governments have consolidated their positions to some extent, their struggle against the workers will begin. Here, in order to be able to offer energetic opposition to the democratic petty bourgeois, it is above all necessary that the workers shall be independently organized and centralized in clubs. After the overthrow of the existing governments, the Central Committee will, as soon as it is at all possible, betake itself to Germany, immediately convene a Congress. Turning the page. And put before the latter the necessary proposals for the centralization of the workers' clubs under a leadership established in the chief seat of the movement. The speedy organization of at least a provincial interlink of the workers' clubs is one of the most important points for the strengthening and development of the Workers' Party. The immediate consequence of the overthrow of the existing governments will be the election of a national representative assembly. Here the proletariat must see to it: 1. That no groups of workers are barred on any pretext or by any kind of trickery on the part of local authorities or government commissioners. Meaning everyone has like an equal opportunity to have a say. I think clubs are different from the government. Yeah, and I think that kind of wording that is chosen intentionally to have it be not centering these other types, these systems of power and oppression that people are used to, that it's a reframing of it. 2. That everywhere workers' candidates are put up alongside of the bourgeois democratic candidates, that they should consist as far as possible of members of the League, and that their election is promoted by all possible means. Even when there is no prospect whatsoever of their being elected, the workers must put up their own candidates in order to preserve their independence, to count their forces, and to bring before the public their revolutionary attitude and party standpoint. Yeah, so part of it is just like showing that kind of representation, like having that be visible and actually having different viewpoints be in the public eye. In this connection, they must not allow themselves to be seduced by the arguments of the Democrats, as, for example, that by doing so, they are splitting the Democratic Party and making it possible for the reactionaries to win. We've heard that before. The ultimate intention of all such phrases is to dupe the proletariat. The advance which the proletarian party is bound to make by such independent action is infinitely more important than the disadvantage that might be incurred by the presence of a few reactionaries in the representative body. If the democracy from the outset comes out resolutely and terroristically against the reaction, the influence of the latter in the elections will be destroyed in advance. The first point on which the bourgeois democrats will come into conflict with the workers will be the abolition of feudalism. As in the first French Revolution, the petty bourgeois will give the feudal lands to the peasants as free property, that is to say, try to leave the rural proletariat in existence and form a petty bourgeois peasant class, which will go through the same cycle of impoverishment and indebtedness which the French peasant is now still going through. For the people and not for capital. Yeah, exactly. The workers must oppose this plan in the interest of the rural proletariat and in their own interest. They must demand that the confiscated feudal property remain state property and be converted into workers' colonies cultivated by the associated rural proletariat with all the advantages of large-scale agriculture, through which the principle of the common property immediately obtains a firm basis in the midst of the tottering bourgeois property relations. So even that type of wording, like me talking about how like we need to continue to decolonize our minds, decolonize language, decolonize ideology, decolonize Marxism, that like it's necessary, of like even saying the word colony, that is immediately charged with all of these systems of oppression. And so like I just want to call that out, that it's like the ideal is not to have a colony, it is to have essentially like these like smaller communities. Just as the Democrats combine with the peasants, so must the workers combine with the rural proletariat. Further, the Democrats will work either directly for a federative republic, or if they cannot avoid a single and indivisible republic, they will at least attempt to cripple the central government by the utmost possible autonomy and independence for the communities and provinces. The workers, in opposition to this plan, must not only strive for a single and indivisible German republic, but also within this republic for the most determined centralization of power in the hands of the state authority. They must not allow themselves to be misguided by the democratic talk of freedom for the communities, of self-government, etc. In a country like Germany, where there are still so many relics of the Middle Ages to be abolished, where there is so much local and provincial obstinacy to be broken, it must under no circumstances be permitted that every village, every town, and every province should put a new obstacle in the path of revolutionary activity, which can proceed with full force only from the center. It is not to be tolerated that the present state of affairs should be renewed, that Germans must fight separately in every town and in every province for one and the same advance. Least of all is it to be tolerated that a form of property, namely communal property, which still lags behind modern private property, and which everywhere is necessarily passing into the latter, together with the quarrels resulting from it between poor and rich communities, as well as communal civil law, with its trickery against the workers, that exists alongside the state civil law, should be perpetuated by a so-called free communal constitution. As in France in 1793, so today in Germany, it is the task of the really revolutionary party to carry through the strictest centralization. You don't mean call out, I like how the 13 original colonies. Yeah. What? Yeah, exactly. What are the lyrics? Shout 'em, scout 'em, tell all about 'em. Exactly. Yeah, we aren't wanting that. The song is catchy. I'll give it that. But yeah, just making sure we are highlighting that language. Okay, here we have a note to read. It must be recalled today that this passage is based on a misunderstanding. At that time, thanks to the Bonapartist and liberal falsifiers of history, it was considered as established that the French centralized machine of administration had been introduced by the Great Revolution, and in particular that it had been operated by the Convention as an indispensable and decisive weapon for defeating the Royalist and Federalist reaction and the external enemy. It is now, however, a well-known fact that throughout the whole Revolution up to the 18th Brumaire, the whole administration of the departments, arrondissements, and communes consisted of authorities elected by the representative constituents themselves, and that these authorities acted with complete freedom within the general state laws. That precisely this provincial and local self-government, similar to the American, became the most powerful lever of the Revolution, and indeed to such an extent that Napoleon, immediately after his coup d'etat of the 18th Brumaire, hastened to replace it by an administration by prefects, which still exists, and which, therefore, was a pure instrument of reaction from the beginning. But just as little as local and provincial self-government is in contradiction to political national centralization, so is it to an equally small extent necessarily bound up with that narrow-minded, cantonal or communal self-seeking which strikes us as so repulsive in Switzerland, and which all the South German federal republics wanted to make the rule in Germany in 1849. Note by Engels in the 1885 edition. Also, it's interesting to be talking about like following the American example. That's not a great thing. We have seen how the Democrats will come to power with the next movement and how they will be compelled to propose more or less socialistic measures. It will be asked what measures the workers ought to propose in reply. At the beginning of the movement, of course, the workers cannot yet propose any directly communistic measures, but they can, 1. Compel the Democrats to interfere in as many spheres as possible of the hitherto existing social order, to disturb its regular course, and to compromise themselves as well as to concentrate the utmost possible productive forces, means of transport, factories, railways, etc., in the hands of the state. 2. They must They must drive the proposals of the Democrats, who in any case will not act in a revolutionary but in a merely reformist manner, to the extreme and transform them into direct attacks upon private property. Thus, for example, if the petty bourgeois propose purchase of the railways and factories, the workers must demand that these railways and factories shall be simply confiscated by the state without compensation as being the property of reactionaries. If the Democrats propose proportional taxes, the workers must demand progressive taxes. If the Democrats themselves put forward a moderately progressive tax, the workers must insist on a tax with rates that rise so steeply that big capital will be ruined by it. If the Democrats demand the regulation of state debts, the workers must demand state bankruptcy. Thus, the demands of the workers must everywhere be governed by the concessions and measures of the Democrats. I think this brings up a good point of, we're existing in electoralism that, unfortunately does have an impact on our material conditions. The whole system acts as it does without a whole lot of changes, but also, it is important to recognize how, it's not enough, the Zoran Mamdanis of the world who are democratic socialists, that I think he has done some good policies for things that is much more progressive than many people, but also there are still concessions that he makes in order to get these things done, and that it's not enough to just say oh, we're glad that he's doing this, but they need to be constantly pressured to be doing more and more and more, and that we need to be calling out all of these concessions. For example, a few of these clinics that they had or that they're starting up are not offering healthcare, gender affirming care to trans youth. That is a huge concession that should alarm all of us who are for collective liberation and for solidarity. That it's a common phenomenon for people to cede ground on human rights when it comes to trans people, especially in this moment. And that we need to be calling that out and saying it's not enough that he's just doing some things that are helpful for the working class. We have to be pushing them further than what some of these other elected officials can be. America isn't real. It's a reality TV set. I mean, if anything has shown us that, it's the Trump administrations. I've said this, but I'll reiterate it, that reality TV was the best training ground for Donald Trump with politics than anything that he could have been doing. That understanding what it means to be on camera and be putting on a show for people, that it just goes to show how completely absurd all of this bullshit is, and is an indictment of the system. That he understands how to work the system and that it's functioning as it was built to. That lady on the plane. You're not real. Wrestling an apprentice was pure mythos over substance. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this kayfabe. I don't watch wrestling. I just know what that like concept is. And uh essentially understanding that like what people see is what people believe. And so this is why like I think it can be important and helpful for like leftists or like more just like pro human, not saying pro life because that means something very different. Just like anyone who is for resistance against what's happening, that like optics can be helpful because they engage in optics all the time, the ruling class, and especially fascists do. And so, like, how do we also engage in ways that are substantive? Because, like, while they are engaging in optics, they also are, like, going through this very detailed plan to diminish working class power and strip away people's human rights. So like it can't just be like the frog suits and stuff like that can be helpful, but also like the same people who are not wanting to be more militant or actually embrace more of a diversity of tactics, the people who are in the frog suits, that it's like often the people who are able to have the most movement with power is worker power. So you can't just say like, oh, we can't engage in certain tactics when like people who are constantly the ruling class who are constantly trying to diminish our power, they have plans in addition to in addition to optics. See birds outside. They're human watchers. I like birds. Birds, I don't really like getting up close and personal to them, but there have been some ravens around here that I'm trying to befriend, and I think that's my destiny. So, let's not be froggish. Yeah, supporting frogs. In the frog suits, people can embrace that as long as same frogs also support frogs more for the working class frogs. I moved from the city and didn't de-radicalize. I work safety for 15 farms. That's my praxis. Yeah, I love that. And that takes like a very intentional type of existence and thought process. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure to conform just everywhere. I got in my house. I let outside like a Disney princess. Oh. I have a fear of spiders. I always have. But I also recognize they're so good for the planet and that most of the time they are not harmful. I just have like this instinctual reaction. Oh, a bird. Wow. That's wild. I mean, literally. So I've been trying to be better about like finding ways to like usher them outside and not like smash them or anything. I don't really like killing things in general. Okay. Especially when I'm like, we're here, we put up our human structures, they are existing in their habitat. Safety is two jobs. I try to do actual safety and then I get judged on mitigating corporate liability. I mean, that also is difficult too, in feeling like you have to take on that extra risk. But I mean, I can relate to that, especially like having worked for the state government and like doing what you can to actually, yeah, mitigate the exploitation of workers and make sure that like things actually get done and that people are safe and that like it does take risk to do that, but it can be a lot more work and stress. And that just is, like an unfortunate aspect of what it means to have a backbone and care about other human beings, I think. And you probably don't get um the credit that you would like. So just saying like I'm sure if people knew everything that you were doing, they would be grateful. But even if they weren't, I think it's admirable to be engaging it just because you value other human beings. Sneaky radicalizing rhetoric at toolbox talks. I love that. Yeah, especially when it comes to like people in the working class being like, oh, we don't like the government, or we don't like this, or like we don't like billionaires. I mean, not every one of them are like that, but yeah, finding that common ground and then being like, how can we dig in there? Like, let's think about this a little more. If the German workers are not able to attain power and achieve their own class interests without completely going through a lengthy revolutionary development, they at least know for certainty this time that the first act of this approaching revolutionary drama will coincide with the direct victory of their own class in France and will be very much accelerated by it. But they themselves must do the utmost for their final victory by clarifying their minds as to what their class interests are, by taking up their position as an independent party as soon as possible, and by not allowing themselves to be seduced for a single moment by the hypocritical phrases of the democratic petty bourgeois into reframing from the independent organization of the party of the proletariat. Their battle cry must be the revolution and permanence. Yeah, especially as like we are in this current moment, there are a lot of liberals, a lot of like conservative socialists that are that seem to have more access to like Marxist terminology, and that can make it so people are able to present themselves as being better faith or more understanding of certain movements and philosophy than what they actually are. And so like it's good to constantly be vigilant and trying to understand what people's motives are, because even if people know how to say the right thing, even if they believe a lot of the same things in theory, they're saying that they do, like, what are they doing with their actions? Are they treating people with like lower wages or salaries like shit? Are they talking about disabled people in a demeaning manner? Are they racist? Are they queerphobic? Like, that's not what liberation means. So like constantly having to assess where people are at and what their intentions are, and like that can be exhausting. And also like as people like coming into various movements, like it can be frustrating and exhausting to feel like you are under scrutiny, or that like people underestimate you. But also like if you are truly wanting to engage in a good faith manner, like I think we should come to expect to be underestimated or distrusted in many ways, and then go from there to like prove with actions and like how we treat people that we actually are acting in good faith, you know? That's my take. Okay, we finished that. Yay! So I did want to read next, as Tan suggested. I really like this suggestion of reading Othello next. So that will be a pivot from less theory, but also I think it's helpful in taking a more Marxist lens to the text, Shakespearean texts. So we'll be reading that. I did also want to read at the same time this this play called Desdemona that is written by Toni Morrison. She's also the author of The Bluest Eye, what we're reading for Band Book Club. She is an incredible artist, and I think that would be great in actually having her perspective and her bringing her own decolonizing lens to Othello as we are engaging with the text. So I'll figure out how I want to go about that, but whatever happens, we'll start engaging with it tomorrow, even if it's just like an introduction to like the background of Othello. So yeah. Thank you all for being here. That's going to be it for me today, but I really appreciate you being willing to engage and talk about these things. I think it's important, not just for humanizing ourselves, but and like engaging with like-minded people, even if we aren't like-minded, like having these conversations that embrace diversity of thought is important. And also just for society in general. Yeah, thank you for being here. It was lovely being with you all. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, and if you turn on notifications, then you will find out when I'm streaming tomorrow. Okay. Bye.